The Galactic Council had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. 17 ancient species sat in the Great Hall on the station called Nexus Prime, making decisions that shaped the lives of trillions. They were old, they were powerful, and they believed they had solved the problem of war. Long ago, these elder races had grown tired of the chaos that came with conflict. Entire worlds had burned, civilizations had collapsed, trade routes had been destroyed for centuries. So they created something they called the laws of civilized engagement. War would still exist, but it would follow rules, strict rules, beautiful rules. When two species had a disagreement, they would announce their intention to fight 3 months in advance. They would choose a battlefield, usually an empty world with no value. They would bring their fleets and their soldiers to this place, and they would fight until one side surrendered. Civilians were never touched. Cities were never bombed. Trade continued as normal. It was clean and simple, and everyone understood how it worked. The elder races were very proud of this system. They called it civilized. They called it enlightened. They looked down on any species that did not understand the beauty of their ordered warfare. When humanity first appeared among the stars in the year 2156, the Council barely noticed. Earth was a small world on the edge of known space. Humans had only just learned to travel faster than light. They were primitives in the eyes of the ancient races, children who had stumbled into a room full of adults. The Council granted Earth provisional membership in the galactic community. They gave humanity a small territory on the fringe, far from anything important. They expected humans to learn their place. They expected humans to follow the rules. They expected humans to be grateful for the opportunity to exist in the shadow of greater civilizations. General Daniel Carter was 53 years old when he received orders to serve as humanity's military liaison to the Galactic Council. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had spent 30 years fighting in Earth's last wars, the brutal conflicts that had finally unified the planet under one government. He had seen things that still visited him in his dreams. Carter traveled to Nexus Prime and took his seat in the observation gallery, far below the great circle where the elder races made their decisions. He watched and he listened and he learned. He attended their ceremonies. He studied their laws. He observed their wars. The first war he witnessed was between the Collective and the Empire. It was fought over mining rights to a distant asteroid field. The two species met on a designated world called Pale Station. Their fleets faced each other in perfect formation. They fired their weapons according to ancient protocols. After 3 days, they surrendered. They claimed the asteroid field. Both sides shook hands and returned to business as usual. Carter sat in his quarters that night and thought about what he had seen. He thought about the wars he had fought on Earth. He thought about the cities that had burned and the people who had died. He thought about how war had always been a terrible thing, something to be avoided at all costs because the costs were so high. But these aliens had made war into a game, a sport, something scheduled in advance like a business meeting. They had removed all the pain and all the fear and all the consequences. And because war cost them nothing, they went to war over nothing. Mining rights, trade disputes, insults spoken centuries ago. Carter understood something that the elder races had forgotten. War was supposed to be terrible. That was the whole point. When war was terrible, people tried very hard not to start one. The hegemony was one of the oldest species in the Council. They had been traveling between stars when humans were still living in caves. Their ambassador was a tall creature with silver scales and cold black eyes. His name was impossible for human tongues to speak, so Carter simply called him the in his reports. They did not like humans. This was clear from the first moment Carter met him. The ambassador looked at the human general the way a person might look at an insect crawling across their dinner table. Carter was beneath his notice. Humanity was beneath his notice. They were temporary guests in a galaxy that belonged to older and wiser species. A human mining company established an operation near the border of space. The company had followed every rule. They had filed every form. They had received permission from the proper authorities, but they decided they did not want humans so close to their territory. The ambassador stood before the council and issued a formal challenge. According to the laws of civilized engagement, the hegemony would resolve this dispute through war. The battlefield would be a barren world called Seven. The date would be 3 months hence. Humanity would have the opportunity to defend its claim through combat. Carter received his orders from Earth. He was to gather humanity's small fleet and travel to Seven. He was to fight according to the rules. He was to represent his species with honor and dignity. He did as he was told. He gathered the ships. He trained the crews. He studied tactics and prepared his strategies. He trusted the system because the system was all he had. The laws of civilized engagement would protect humanity. The rules would keep things fair. On the day before the fleet departed for Seven, Carter received a message from his daughter back on Earth. She had just given birth to his first grandchild, a little girl named. Carter smiled as he looked at the picture of the tiny baby with her eyes closed and her small hands curled into fists. He saved the image to his personal files and boarded his flagship. He would fight this war and return home to meet his granddaughter. The rules would protect him. The rules would protect everyone. He did not know that on a world called New Eden, 4 million humans were living their ordinary lives, completely unaware that the rules meant nothing at all. New Eden was a beautiful world. It had blue oceans and green forests and mountains that touched the clouds. When the first human colonists arrived 40 years ago, they wept at the sight of it. After the crowded cities of Earth, after the pollution and the wars and the suffering, they had found paradise. The colony grew quickly. Farmers planted crops in the rich soil. Engineers built cities that blended with the natural landscape. Families raised children who had never known the struggles of the old world. By the time they issued their challenge, New Eden was home to 4.2 million people. Lisa Morgan was a teacher in the capital city. She was 34 years old with brown hair and a kind smile. On the morning everything changed, she was preparing her classroom for the day's lessons. Her students were studying the history of Earth, learning about the wars that had driven humanity to seek new homes among the stars. She heard the first explosion at 9:47 in the morning. The ground shook beneath her feet. The windows cracked. Children screamed. Lisa ran to the window and looked up at the sky. The sky was full of ships. General Carter was on Seven when the news reached him. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, waiting for the fleet to arrive at the designated battlefield. His communications officer turned pale and called for his attention. The message was simple and devastating. A massive fleet had bypassed Seven entirely. They had traveled to New Eden. They were attacking the civilian population. Carter felt something cold spread through his chest. This was impossible. The laws of civilized engagement were clear. Civilians were never targets. Colony worlds were protected. The battlefield had been chosen and agreed upon by both sides. He ordered his fleet to New Eden at maximum speed, but he knew the truth even as he gave the order. They were too far away. They would never arrive in time. The attack on New Eden lasted 6 hours. The ships moved in perfect formation above the cities. They fired their weapons with precision and patience. Buildings collapsed. Forests burned. The blue oceans turned black with ash. Lisa Morgan died trying to protect her students. She gathered them in the basement of the school and held them close as the ceiling came down. She was one of the first to fall. She would not be the last. When they finished, they simply left. Their ships rose into the sky and vanished into the darkness between stars. They left behind a world covered in smoke and silence. Of the 4.2 million people who had called New Eden home, fewer than 300,000 survived. Carter's fleet arrived 2 days later. The general walked through the ruins of the capital city. He saw the bodies of children in the streets. He saw the collapsed schools and hospitals. He saw the faces of survivors who stared at nothing with empty eyes. He found the remains of Lisa Morgan's classroom. He stood among the rubble and did not speak. A small hand reached up from beneath a fallen beam. Carter knelt and carefully moved the debris. Beneath it, he found a little girl, no older than 7, still breathing. Her name was Emma. She had hidden beneath her teacher's body when the ceiling fell. Lisa Morgan had saved one student with her last breath. Carter carried Emma to the medical ship himself. He stayed with her until she fell asleep. Then he returned to his quarters and sat in silence for a very long time. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session to discuss the attack on New Eden. Carter was given permission to address the Great Hall. He stood at the podium and looked up at the 17 ancient species who controlled the galaxy. The ambassador spoke first. He expressed regret for the unfortunate incident. There had been a navigation error, he explained, a miscommunication in the fleet. The attack on New Eden was a tragedy, but it was an accident. These things happened in war. Carter listened to the lies. He watched the smile. Other species spoke. They expressed concern. They suggested that the matter required careful study. Perhaps a committee could be formed to investigate the incident and make recommendations for preventing similar accidents in the future. Carter stood at the podium and felt the weight of 4 million dead pressing down on his shoulders. He asked the council what punishment would be delivered to the hegemony. He asked what justice would be provided for the people of New Eden. The answer was simple. According to the laws of civilized engagement, disputes between species were settled through designated warfare. New Eden was not a designated battlefield. Therefore, the attack fell outside the scope of the laws. They would pay a modest fine for the navigation error. They would issue a formal apology to humanity. The matter would be considered closed. Carter looked at the faces of the elder races. He saw boredom. He saw indifference. He saw creatures who had lived for thousands of years and had forgotten what it meant to lose something precious. The ambassador approached him after the session ended. The silver-scaled creature looked down at the human general with those cold black eyes. "You should thank us," the ambassador said quietly. "We have taught your species a valuable lesson about your place in this galaxy. You are guests here, nothing more. The sooner you accept this, the easier your existence will be." Carter said nothing. He looked at the ambassador for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away. He returned to Earth that night. He went to the hospital where the survivors of New Eden were being treated. He sat beside Emma's bed and watched her sleep. He thought about his daughter and his granddaughter. He thought about Lisa Morgan and her students. He thought about 4 million people who had been murdered because an ancient species wanted to teach humanity a lesson. Something changed in Daniel Carter during those quiet hours. The anger did not burn hot. It turned cold. It turned patient. It turned into something that would wait as long as necessary. The council had made its choice. They had shown humanity exactly how much human lives were worth in their civilized galaxy. Carter would show them what that choice would cost. 5 years passed after the massacre of New Eden. The galaxy continued as it always had. The elder races made their deals and fought their civilized wars. They grew bolder, expanding their territory and pushing against human borders. They expected no resistance. They had taught the primitives their lesson. General Daniel Carter spent those 5 years preparing. He returned to Earth and requested a meeting with the highest levels of government. He stood before the leaders of humanity and told them the truth. The laws of civilized engagement were a trap. They existed to protect the powerful from consequences. As long as humanity played by the rules, they would always lose. Carter proposed something different. He proposed total war. The leaders of Earth listened carefully. Some were afraid. Some were angry. Some thought Carter had lost his mind. But in the end, they remembered New Eden. They remembered 4 million dead. They gave Carter everything he asked for. The general built a new military from nothing. He threw away every textbook and every tradition. He recruited young officers who had no attachment to the old ways. He trained soldiers in tactics that had never been used in space warfare, because the elder races had never imagined anyone would be cruel enough to use them. Lieutenant Shaw was 26 years old when she joined Carter's program. She was smart and tough and had grown up on a station near the New Eden system. She had lost friends in the massacre. When Carter explained what he was building, she did not hesitate. "Tell me what you need," she said. Carter showed her the plans. Human ships would be small and fast. They would not form pretty lines and announce their presence. They would hide in asteroid fields and attack without warning. They would strike at supply lines and communication networks. They would hit the enemy where they were weakest and disappear before anyone could respond. Shaw smiled for the first time since New Eden. "When do we start?" For 5 years, Carter studied the hegemony. He learned where they stored their food. He learned how they moved their ships. He learned the names of their leaders and the locations of their families. He mapped every weakness, every vulnerability, every pressure point. He also studied the other council races. He learned that the elder species had grown soft after 12,000 years of civilized warfare. They had forgotten how to fight for survival. They had forgotten what happened when an enemy did not follow the rules. During those 5 years, Carter visited Emma once every month. The little girl he had pulled from the rubble of New Eden was now 12 years old. She lived with a foster family who loved her, but the shadows never left her eyes. She had nightmares every night. She could not stand the sound of loud noises. Carter never told her what he was planning. He simply sat with her and listened to her talk about school and friends, and the life she was trying to build from the ashes of her old one. Every visit reminded him why he was doing this. Every visit fed the cold fire that burned inside him. On the 5th anniversary of New Eden, they issued another challenge. A human transport ship had crossed too close to space. The hegemony demanded satisfaction. They designated a battlefield. They set a date 3 months hence. They expected the primitive humans to gather their little fleet and come die according to the rules. Carter accepted the challenge publicly. He thanked the council for their oversight. He promised to follow all proper procedures. Then he gathered his commanders in a secure room on Earth and revealed the truth. "We're not going to 9," he said quietly. "We're going to end this war in a way they will never forget." On the day the war officially began, the fleet arrived at the designated battlefield. They formed their beautiful lines. They waited for the human ships to appear. The humans never came. Instead, a message appeared on every communication channel in the galaxy. General Daniel Carter addressed the hegemony directly. "5 years ago, you murdered 4 million innocent people and called it a lesson. You taught us that the rules protect only the powerful. You taught us that civilized warfare is a game designed to keep species like yours safe from consequences." Carter paused and let the words sink in. "Today, we reject your rules. Today, we fight the way humans have always fought. We fight to win. We fight to destroy. And we will not stop until the hegemony no longer exists as a military power." At that exact moment, human ships appeared above them. They had traveled in silence, hidden in the shadow of cargo freighters, disguised as civilian traffic. Now they dropped their disguises and opened fire. The orbital defense network was destroyed in 17 minutes. Communication satellites fell from the sky like burning rain. Supply depots that had served the fleet for centuries vanished in balls of fire. And then the humans disappeared. They scrambled their response fleets. They searched every sector. They sent urgent messages to the council demanding justice. But the human ships were already gone. They had split into dozens of small groups and scattered across territory. Over the next week, they struck again and again. Fuel stations, mining operations, military outposts. Each attack was quick and devastating. Each time, the humans vanished before they could respond. The council was outraged. The ambassador stood before the Great Hall and screamed about violations of the laws of civilized engagement. He demanded that humanity be punished for their barbarism. Carter sent another message. The laws of civilized engagement died with the people of New Eden. From this day forward, humanity wages war without rules. Those who attack us will face total war. Those who massacre our civilians will see their own worlds burn. This is not a threat. This is a promise. Within 3 months, the hegemony surrendered unconditionally. Their fleet was scattered. Their infrastructure was ruined. Their leaders were hiding in bunkers, afraid to show their faces. It was the fastest major war in 12,000 years of galactic history. And it was only the beginning. The galaxy had never seen anything like it. The hegemony, one of the oldest and most powerful species in known space, had been brought to their knees in 90 days. Their surrender was unconditional and humiliating. The silver-scaled ambassador who had once smiled at Carter with such contempt now stood before the council with tears running down his face, begging for mercy. Carter granted mercy. He demanded no territory. He claimed no resources. He simply required that they acknowledge their crimes against New Eden and pay reparations to the survivors. The hegemony accepted every term without argument. But the council was not ready to let the matter rest. 3 of the most powerful elder races formed an alliance against humanity. The Collective, the Empire, and the Federation announced their intention to restore order to the galaxy. They would punish humanity for violating the sacred laws of civilized engagement. They would teach these primitives that barbarism had no place among civilized species. They gathered the largest fleet the galaxy had seen in 10,000 years, 2,000 warships from 3 ancient civilizations. They announced their challenge and designated a battlefield far from human space. They expected Carter to come and face their judgment. Carter did not come. Instead, his forces appeared above them on the same day. The fleet departed for the designated battlefield. They destroyed the planetary shield generators in less than an hour. They did not fire on cities or civilians. They simply demonstrated that they could. Then they broadcast a simple message: surrender now or face the consequences. They refused. Their fleet turned around and raced back to defend their home, but Carter's ships were already gone. They appeared next above the capital, then the communication hub, then a dozen supply stations across the Alliance territory. Admiral Shaw commanded the 3rd attack group. She was 31 now, hardened by years of preparation and the weight of what she had done. Her ships moved like ghosts through enemy space, striking where the Alliance was weakest. She thought about New Eden with every order she gave. She thought about the children who had died because ancient races considered human lives worthless. She felt no guilt for what she was doing. She felt only cold purpose. The Alliance could not catch the human ships. Every time they moved their fleet to one location, Carter struck somewhere else. Their commanders grew frustrated and afraid. They had spent centuries fighting civilized wars with clear rules and predictable outcomes. They did not know how to fight an enemy who refused to stand still. After 7 weeks, the Federation broke first. Their ambassador appeared before the council and announced withdrawal from the Alliance. They had lost 17 supply stations and 4 orbital platforms. Their economy was collapsing. They could not sustain a war against an enemy they could not find. The followed 2 weeks later. Their emperor, an ancient creature who had ruled for 300 years, died of what his physicians called stress-related complications. His successor immediately sued for peace. They held out for another month. They were proud and stubborn and refused to admit defeat. Carter gave them one final warning: accept peace or face total destruction. When they refused, Carter destroyed their primary shipyard. 800 years of accumulated infrastructure vanished in a single hour. The collective surrendered the next morning. The Great Alliance had lasted 9 weeks. It had accomplished nothing except to prove that the laws of civilized engagement no longer protected anyone. But something else was happening across the galaxy. The younger species, the ones who had been bullied and exploited by the elder races were watching. They saw how humans had defeated the impossible. They saw how a species that had been dismissed as primitives had humiliated the oldest powers in known space. They began to ask questions. A species called that had been paying tribute to them for 800 years. Their leaders watched Carter's broadcasts with growing excitement. If humans could defy the laws of civilized engagement, why couldn't they? 6 months after the Alliance collapsed, they stopped their tribute payments. When they sent a fleet to punish them, they fought back with tactics directly from human operations. They struck supply lines. They attacked without warning. They refused to meet thee on a designated battlefield. The still weakened from their war with humanity were forced to negotiate. Similar rebellions broke out across the galaxy. Species that had been content to accept their place in the hierarchy suddenly realized that place was not permanent. The careful order that had governed galactic civilization for 12,000 years began to fall apart. The council called emergency sessions. They debated. They deliberated. They formed committees and working groups, but they could not put the genie back in the bottle. Too many species had seen what was possible. Too many had learned that the rules only mattered if everyone agreed to follow them. General Carter watched this chaos with mixed feelings. He had set out to punish thee and protect humanity. He had not intended to reshape the entire galaxy, but he understood that some things, once broken, could never be repaired. He visited Emma on her 18th birthday. She was a young woman now, studying engineering at a university on Earth. The shadows in her eyes had faded somewhat. She smiled more often than she used to. "They're calling you a monster," she said as they walked through the campus gardens. "The elder races, I mean. They say you destroyed civilization." Carter nodded slowly. "I destroyed their civilization, the one that let them murder your family without consequences, the one that valued their comfort over your life." Emma was quiet for a moment. "What will replace it?" "I don't know," Carter admitted. "Something different, maybe something better, maybe something worse, but it will be something where human lives have value. That's all I ever wanted." She took his hand and squeezed it gently. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saving me, for all of it." Carter squeezed back and said nothing. He was not sure he deserved thanks. He had done terrible things to achieve his goals. He had destroyed fleets and ruined economies and ended the lives of countless beings. But when he looked at Emma, alive and growing and building a future from the ashes of her past, he could not bring himself to regret any of it. The old order was dying. Something new was being born. And for the first time since New Eden, Daniel Carter allowed himself to hope. 20 years had passed since the massacre of New Eden. The galaxy was unrecognizable. The Galactic Council no longer existed. Its great hall on Nexus Prime stood empty, a museum piece from an age that seemed impossibly distant. The 17 elder races that had once ruled everything were now simply members of the new Galactic Assembly, equal in voice and vote to hundreds of younger species who had once been beneath their notice. The laws of civilized engagement had been formally abolished. No one wanted to return to the old system. The elder races had learned that rules only protected them as long as everyone agreed to follow them. The younger races had learned that they did not have to accept their place at the bottom of the hierarchy. Everyone had learned that war was terrible, and that terrible things should be avoided at all costs. The galaxy was more peaceful than it had been in, not because of rules or laws or treaties, because everyone understood what would happen if those treaties failed. War had consequences now, real consequences. That understanding made civilizations think very carefully before starting conflicts. General Daniel Carter was 78 years old. His hair had turned completely white. His hands shook slightly when he lifted his coffee cup in the morning, but his mind remained sharp, and his eyes still held the cold fire that had frightened the elder races into submission so many years ago. He had been invited to address the first session of the new Galactic Assembly. Representatives from over 300 species filled the massive auditorium. Cameras broadcast his image to trillions of beings across known space. Everyone wanted to hear what the human general would say. Carter walked slowly to the podium. He carried no notes. He had thought about this speech for a very long time. 20 years ago, he began, I stood before the old council and asked for justice. 4 million of my people had been murdered. The species responsible had called it an accident, a lesson, a minor embarrassment. The council agreed. They fined the killers a small amount of money and considered the matter closed. He paused and looked out at the assembly. Many of the representatives had not been born when New Eden burned. For them, it was history. For Carter, it was yesterday. I decided then that the old order could not be allowed to continue. The laws of civilized engagement were a beautiful lie. They made war clean and safe for those in power. They removed the consequences that should have made civilizations hesitate before choosing violence. They created a galaxy where the strong could abuse the weak without fear of punishment. Carter's voice was calm and steady. He spoke as if he were discussing the weather, not the destruction of a galactic civilization. I ended that order. I used methods that the elder races called barbaric. I waged total war. I struck at infrastructure and supply lines. I refused to follow rules that existed only to protect my enemies, and I won. He took a slow breath. I am not here to apologize for what I did. I would do it again. Every choice I made was in service of a simple goal, to create a galaxy where human lives have value, where no species can massacre civilians and face nothing more than a fine, where power does not guarantee immunity from consequences. Carter looked at the section where human representatives sat. His daughter was there, gray-haired now herself with her own, and beside her sat Emma, the little girl he had pulled from the rubble of New Eden. Emma was 37 years old. She had become an engineer just as she had planned. She had helped design the new station where the assembly met. Carter's granddaughter sat next to Emma. She was 20 years old, born on the rebuilt New Eden, raised in a galaxy that her grandfather had reshaped through blood and fire. She had never known the old order. She had never experienced a galaxy where human lives were worthless. I want to tell you about my granddaughter, Carter continued. Her name is. She was born on New Eden, in a city built on the ashes of the old capital. She grew up without fear. She has never had to worry that some ancient species might decide to teach her people a lesson by murdering everyone she loves. His voice remained steady, but something softened in his eyes. Does not know what it was like before. She does not understand why I did the things I did. She looks at me and sees an old man who tells stories about a war that happened before she was born. She does not see the monster that the elder races speak of when they think no one is listening. Carter smiled slightly. I consider that my greatest victory. He straightened and looked around the assembly one final time. The galaxy you are building is different from the one I destroyed. It is messier. It is more complicated. There are no ancient races to make decisions for everyone else. There are no laws of civilized engagement to remove the consequences of war. Every species must take responsibility for their own actions. He nodded slowly. This is as it should be. War should be terrible. The fear of that terror should make civilizations careful about starting conflicts. The old order failed because it removed that fear. It made war acceptable. It made massacres possible. Carter stepped back from the podium. I have said everything I came to say. The future belongs to you now. Build something worthy of the lives that were lost to create this opportunity. He walked down from the stage without looking back. The assembly was silent. Then, slowly, applause began. It spread through the auditorium until every representative was on their feet. Carter did not stop. He walked through the corridors of the new station toward the docking bay where his transport waited. Admiral Shaw caught up with him near the airlock. She was in her 50s now, her red hair streaked with silver. She had been with Carter from the beginning. She understood what he had done better than almost anyone. "They're calling you a hero," she said. Carter shook his head. "They're wrong." "Are they?" He stopped and turned to face her. "I did terrible things. I destroyed civilizations. I ruined economies. I caused suffering on a scale that most beings cannot imagine. I am not a hero. I am a weapon. I did what was necessary, but that does not make it good." Shaw studied his face. "Do you regret it?" Carter thought about New Eden. He thought about Emma sleeping in the ruins of her school. He thought about the ambassador smiling as he dismissed 4 million dead as a minor inconvenience. "No," he said quietly, "I would do it all again." Shaw nodded. "Then what will you do now?" Carter looked out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there, his granddaughter was waiting for him. A new generation was building a new galaxy on the foundations he had created. His war was over. "I'm going to go home," he said. "I'm going to sit with my family. I'm going to watch my granddaughter grow up in a galaxy where her life has value." He turned and walked through the airlock onto his transport. "That's enough," he said to himself. "That's finally enough." The transport pulled away from the station and vanished into the darkness between stars. General Daniel Carter, the man who had ended civilized war, was going home at last.